I kept the garden untouched after my grandmother died. Some relatives thought it strange that I'd spend weekends on my knees in the soil, preserving each flower bed exactly as she'd planted it. But I knew Irene Shaw hadn't simply been gardening, she'd been encoding messages in the earth. My brother Theo never understood this. He saw her 2-acre Victorian estate as nothing but a windfall waiting to be liquidated. While I cherished her weathered gardening journal with its cryptic notations, Theo focused on her legal papers and investment portfolios. "You're wasting time with those dead flowers, Vivian," he told me the week after her funeral, his voice carrying that familiar edge. "The real value is in the property." I looked up from where I knelt beside her prized black dahlias. "These aren't dead, Theo. They're just dormant." He didn't catch my meaning. He never did. The morning everything changed, I was in the greenhouse, misting the orchids Grandma had cultivated for decades. The door swung open with such force that the delicate glass walls seemed to shudder. "Did you know about this?" Theo demanded, thrusting a document toward me. I carefully set down the mister and took the paper. It was a letter from Grandma's attorney, Solomon Weiss. The reading of the will had been moved up, from next month to tomorrow morning. "No," I said truthfully. "I had no idea." "Bullshit," Theo spat. "You two were thick as thieves. She told you everything." I handed the letter back to him. "Apparently not everything." His eyes narrowed. "This works out better anyway. The sooner we settle this, the sooner we can list the property." "The estate isn't yours to list," I reminded him, returning to the orchids. These particular ones, Phalaenopsis amabilis, had been Grandma's favorites. Complex but resilient. "Not yet," Theo said, his voice dropping to something dangerous and familiar. "But we both know Grandma valued ambition over sentiment. And between the two of us, only one has built something substantial." He gestured around the greenhouse as if it were evidence of my failings rather than my dedication. My brother, the successful real estate developer, had never understood how I could be content managing the local library and tending to Grandma's legacy. "We'll see," was all I said. When he left, I noticed he'd crushed one of the black dahlias under his expensive loafer. Whether by accident or intent, the symbolism wasn't lost on me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the guest room I'd been staying in since Grandma's passing, her leather-bound gardening journal clutched to my chest. I knew I should go through it page by page. She had always said the answers were there, but something held me back. Perhaps the finality of it. As long as I hadn't decoded her last messages, there was still a connection between us. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and ventured into her study. The room remained exactly as she'd left it, the antique desk positioned to capture morning light, walls lined with botanical texts and legal volumes. Grandma had been as shrewd in business as she was gentle with her blooms. I ran my fingers along the spines of her books until I reached the one that always seemed slightly out of place, Property Law and Testamentary Procedures. A strange choice for a woman who'd cultivated gardens most of her life. I pulled it from the shelf. It wasn't a book at all, but a cleverly disguised safe. My heart pounded. I'd discovered this hiding place years ago when helping Grandma reorganize her library, but I'd never known the combination. Now, staring at the dial in the dim light, I wondered if the answer had been in front of me all along. I opened her gardening journal to the last entry, dated just 3 days before her death. The page contained her typical notations about the black dahlias. Soil pH. Water schedules. And a sequence of numbers that had never made sense to me, 8-22-19-7. My fingers trembled as I turned the dial. Click. 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 The safe swung open. Inside was a single manila envelope with my name written in Grandma's elegant script. I withdrew it with reverence, feeling as if I was being watched by something more than the family portraits lining the walls. The envelope contained 2 documents. The first was a letter addressed to me. My dearest Vivian. If you're reading this, you've remembered what I always taught you, that there are messages in the growing things, if only we pay attention. Your brother will attempt to claim what isn't rightfully his. I've known this since he was small, since I caught him taking things that belonged to others and lying without remorse. The enclosed document is a copy of my true will. The original is with Solomon, who has instructions to produce it only if necessary. Whether it becomes necessary depends on Theo's actions tomorrow. Watch him carefully. Let him reveal himself. Trust in the patience you've learned from the garden. Some seeds take longer to sprout, but their blooms are worth the wait. With endless love. Grandma Irene. I set the letter down with shaking hands and examined the second document. It was indeed a will, dated just 1 month before her death, superseding any previous versions. I scanned the provisions, my breath catching as I reached the distribution of assets, then I understood why she'd written that Theo would attempt to claim what wasn't his. According to this will, the bulk of her estate, including the Victorian home and gardens, was left to me, with specific instructions that the property remain intact and the gardens preserved. Theo would receive a cash settlement that, while generous, was far less than the property's value. She had known. Somehow, she had anticipated Theo's greed. I carefully returned the documents to the envelope but didn't place it back in the safe. Instead, I slipped it into her gardening journal and finally allowed myself to rest, curled up in her reading chair as dawn broke through the windows. Tomorrow would come soon enough. And with it, the truth. Solomon Weiss's office smelled of leather and paper, an old-world atmosphere preserved like an insect in amber despite the modern city rising around it. Theo arrived precisely on time, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. He barely acknowledged me as he took the seat beside mine, opposite Solomon's imposing mahogany desk. Solomon himself was exactly as I remembered, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, with reading glasses perched precariously on his nose. He had been Grandma's attorney for over 30 years, and something in his expression when he looked at Theo made me think he shared some of her misgivings. "Thank you both for coming on such short notice," Solomon began, adjusting his glasses. "As you know, your grandmother, Irene Shaw, left explicit instructions regarding her estate." Theo leaned forward slightly. "Let's get to the point, shall we? What exactly did the old lady leave us?" I winced at his callousness, but Solomon merely raised an eyebrow. "Actually, Mr. Shaw, I was hoping you might tell us." Theo blinked. "Excuse me? I've been informed that you've recently presented a will to the probate court. One which, curiously, I did not prepare, despite having been Mrs. Shaw's attorney for 3 decades. The air in the room seemed to crystallize. I turned to look at Theo, whose expression had gone carefully blank. "I found it among her things," he said smoothly. "She must have had it drawn up separately." Solomon's gaze was unwavering. "Indeed. Most curious. Especially since it contradicts her long-standing wishes regarding the disposition of her property." "Wishes change," Theo said with a shrug. "She obviously wanted to ensure the estate went to someone who could properly manage it." "By properly manage, you mean sell off immediately?" I couldn't stop myself from asking. Theo shot me a venomous look. Not everyone wants to play garden fairy for the rest of their lives, Viv. Some of us understand the concept of progress. Solomon cleared his throat. If I may continue. This unexpected document has complicated matters. Ordinarily, I would now read the will I have on file. However, given the discrepancy, we will need to resolve the validity of these competing documents before proceeding. My heart sank. I had brought Grandma's true will with me, tucked safely in my bag, but I remembered her instructions: watch him carefully. Let him reveal himself. What does his version say? I asked, though I could guess. Theo answered before Solomon could. Nothing unreasonable. The estate is to be liquidated, with 70% of the proceeds going to me and 30% to you. It's more than fair, considering I'm the one who helped her manage her investments for the past 5 years. And the gardens? I pressed. What does it say about those? He waved dismissively. Property improvements to be valued as part of the overall estate. Really, Viv, they're just plants. You can grow new ones anywhere. They were her life's work, I said quietly. They were a hobby, he countered. A distraction from what really mattered. Solomon watched this exchange with the patience of a man who had witnessed many family disputes. When we fell silent, he folded his hands on the desk. As I said, we must address the validity question before proceeding. Mrs. Shaw's official will is dated September 15th of last year. The document Mr. Shaw has presented is dated October 3rd, ostensibly more recent. However, he trailed off, studying Theo with those penetrating eyes. However, he continued, I have reason to believe the October document may not be authentic. Theo stiffened. Are you accusing me of something? I'm merely stating facts, Mr. Shaw. Your grandmother consulted with me weekly. She never mentioned drafting a new will. Furthermore, I have here, he produced a document from his drawer, her appointment calendar. On October 3rd, the date this mysterious will was supposedly executed, she was in Chicago visiting her sister. I hadn't known that. Grandma had traveled occasionally, but she rarely mentioned it beforehand, preferring to simply disappear and reappear like some botanical sprite. Theo didn't miss a beat. She must have had it prepared before she left. The date is just when it was finalized. Perhaps, Solomon conceded. But there's also the matter of the witnesses. I've taken the liberty of contacting both individuals whose signatures appear on this document. One has no recollection of witnessing any will. The other, curiously, left the country 6 months ago and has not returned since. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Theo's expression hardened, but he said nothing. Solomon continued, almost gently now. Mrs. Shaw anticipated this situation might arise. She left specific instructions with me regarding how to proceed if her will was contested. What instructions? Theo demanded. Solomon smiled thinly. She requested that I ask both beneficiaries a series of questions, things only the true recipient of her estate would know. A test, if you will. Theo laughed, the sound brittle. That's ridiculous. This isn't some fairy tale with riddles to solve. The will I presented is legitimate, and if you challenge it, I'll sue. You're welcome to pursue legal action, Solomon replied calmly. However, the probate court generally takes a dim view of forged documents. The word hung in the air, forged. Theo stood abruptly. I don't have to listen to these accusations. My attorney will be in touch. He stormed out, the door slamming behind him with such force that the framed law certificates on Solomon's wall trembled. When his footsteps had faded, Solomon turned to me with a weary sigh. Your grandmother warned me this might happen. She was quite perceptive about people's characters. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The question now, he continued, is how you wish to proceed. We can challenge the forged will directly, but that would mean a potentially lengthy court battle. Or, I prompted when he hesitated. Or we could follow Irene's plan. Let Theo reveal himself, as she put it. I thought about the envelope tucked in my bag, about Grandma's instructions to wait. What exactly did she have in mind? Solomon's eyes twinkled, reminding me suddenly of Grandma when she was about to impart some gardening wisdom. Something rather ingenious, actually. But it will require patience. And trust. I smiled for the first time that day. Those are two things she taught me well. The next morning, I was back in the greenhouse when Theo arrived, his expensive car crunching on the gravel drive like an intruder. I continued misting the orchids, pretending not to notice as he stalked between the plant tables toward me. Solomon called me, he said without preamble. Apparently he's willing to compromise. I set down the mister and faced him. Is that so? He says Grandma left some sort of challenge in her will. If we both participate, he'll honor the outcome without involving the courts. Theo's tone made it clear what he thought of this idea. And if we don't? Then it becomes a legal battle. Which I'll win, he added, though something in his eyes betrayed uncertainty. But it would take time. And money. So you want to do the challenge? He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a gesture from childhood that made him momentarily look like the brother I used to know. I want to get this over with. I have projects waiting, investments that need capital. I turned back to the orchids. And what exactly is this challenge? Solomon says Grandma left a series of clues, leading to something. An addendum to the will, presumably. Whoever finds it first gets to decide how the estate is divided. I thought of Grandma's letter. Watch him carefully. Let him reveal himself. This must be what she had planned. And you agreed to this? I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. Theo's smile was sharp. I know this property better than you do, Viv. You might play in the dirt on weekends, but I've been helping manage the actual estate for years. The irony of his confidence made me want to laugh. Instead, I simply nodded. When do we start? Tomorrow morning. Solomon will give us the first clue, and then. He gestured vaguely. May the best sibling win. After he left, I returned to the main house and sat in Grandma's study, trying to make sense of it all. I hadn't shown Solomon the will I'd found in the safe. Something had held me back, perhaps Grandma's instructions to wait, or perhaps the sense that there was more to her plan than simply producing the document. I pulled out her gardening journal again, flipping through the pages. Each entry contained not just facts about plants, but philosophical musings, memories, and those strange number sequences that I now realized were probably combinations to various locks around the property. On the last page, below the entry that had opened the study safe, there was a single line I'd overlooked before. When in doubt, return to the beginning. The answer is always in the soil. I closed the journal, thinking. The beginning, where had Grandma's garden begun? She'd lived in this house for over 50 years, expanding her gardens gradually. But the first plot, the one she'd started with. My mind raced. The rose garden. That's where she'd begun, with a handful of heirloom plants brought from her childhood home. It was the heart of the property, both literally and figuratively, centrally located, visible from most windows of the house. I grabbed a flashlight and headed out, though the sun was beginning to set. The rose garden was immaculate, as I'd kept it, with gravel paths winding between beds arranged in a complex geometric pattern. In the center stood a small fountain, its gentle splash the only sound in the evening stillness. I walked the path slowly, searching for, what? A marker? A sign? Some indication of what Grandma had hidden? As darkness fell, I reluctantly returned to the house. Whatever clue might be hidden in the rose garden, it would have to wait until morning. Grandma's voice seemed to whisper in my ear, "Patience, dear one. Good things come to those who wait." That night, I dreamed of Grandma. Not as she'd been at the end, frail and bedridden, but as she'd been in my childhood, vibrant, sharp-eyed, her hands perpetually stained with soil. In the dream, she led me through the gardens, pointing out plants but making no sound. When I tried to ask her questions, my own voice was similarly silent. Then she stopped beside the fountain in the rose garden and pointed down. The water cleared, becoming transparent as glass, and I could see something glinting at the bottom. I woke with the first light of dawn, the dream still vivid. Without even stopping for coffee, I threw on a sweater and hurried out to the rose garden. The fountain burbled peacefully in the morning light, water crystal clear in the basin. Impulsively, I reached into the cold water, my fingers searching the smooth bottom. Nothing. Just coins tossed in by visitors over the years, wishes made and forgotten. I sat back on my heels, disappointed. Just a dream, then. But as I started to stand, something caught my eye, a small discoloration on the fountain's rim. I leaned closer. It wasn't a stain but writing, almost imperceptible unless the light hit it just right. The first seed planted bears witness to time's passage. I smiled despite myself. Classic Grandma, cryptic yet somehow precise. The first seed planted, that would be the oldest rose in the garden, an ancient white damask she'd called the witness. It grew at the garden's eastern edge, massive now after decades of careful tending. I made my way there, conscious that Solomon would be giving us the first official clue in just a few hours. This felt like a head start, though I wasn't sure what I was looking for. The witness rose stood majestic in the morning light, its white blooms still closed against the early chill. I knelt beside it, examining the soil, the structure of the plant itself. Nothing seemed out of place. Then I noticed a small brass marker at the base of the plant, the kind Grandma used to identify her specimens. But instead of a botanical name, this one bore another riddle. What falls but never breaks, breaks but never falls? I frowned. Grandma had loved riddles, often using them to teach me about nature's paradoxes. This one was familiar, though I couldn't immediately place it. What falls but never breaks? Rain, perhaps? But rain didn't break in any meaningful sense. Breaks but never falls. My mind cycled through possibilities. Waves? They broke on shores but didn't exactly fall. Then it hit me. Night. Night falls but never breaks. Day breaks but never falls. I looked around, trying to connect this answer to something in the garden. Did Grandma have night-blooming plants? She had several evening primrose, moonflowers, night-blooming jasmine, but they were scattered throughout the property in different beds. The answer came to me suddenly. The sundial. Nestled in a quiet corner of the property was an ancient sundial, one of Grandma's prized possessions. It tracked the passage of day into night, the breaking and falling that the riddle described. I hurried there, aware that time was ticking toward my meeting with Solomon and Theo. The sundial stood on its pedestal, just as it had for decades, its face weathered but still functional. I examined it carefully, running my fingers along the engravings. There, on the base, barely visible without crouching down, was another inscription. Time reveals all truths. 11-9-21-33. Another combination. But to what? The sound of tires on gravel jolted me back to the present. Theo had arrived earlier than expected. I quickly memorized the numbers and hurried back toward the house, not wanting him to see where I'd been. Solomon was just getting out of his car when I reached the front drive. Theo strode up moments later, his expression guarded. "Good morning," Solomon greeted us both, his tone pleasantly formal. "I trust you're both ready to begin Mrs. Shaw's challenge?" Theo nodded impatiently. "Let's get on with it." Solomon produced an envelope from his briefcase. "Your grandmother left specific instructions. This first clue is to be read here, on the property, with both of you present." He opened the envelope and read aloud. "To my beloved grandchildren, Vivian and Theodore, beyond material possessions, my greatest legacy is the wisdom I've tried to impart. This final lesson is perhaps the most important, that truth, like the most precious blooms, often requires effort to uncover. Your first clue lies where time stands still, yet moves ever forward." Theo frowned. "What is this, a treasure hunt?" In a manner of speaking, Solomon replied calmly. "Mrs. Shaw believed the true value of her estate would be appreciated only by the one who understood her philosophy." I remained silent, thinking about the sundial I'd just visited. Where time stands still, yet moves ever forward. It had to be the same location. The question was whether I should reveal my head start or keep it to myself. Before I could decide, Theo strode off toward the house. "Where are you going?" I called after him. "To check the grandfather clock in the foyer," he replied without turning around. "Time stands still but moves forward, it's obvious." I exchanged a glance with Solomon, whose expression revealed nothing. Then I followed Theo inside, curious to see how his search would unfold. The grandfather clock stood majestically in the foyer, just as it had throughout our childhood. Theo was already examining it carefully, opening the glass panel to study the face and hands. "There's nothing here," he muttered after a minute of searching. "Perhaps you're looking in the wrong place," Solomon suggested mildly. "Mrs. Shaw's clues often operate on multiple levels." Theo shot him an irritated look. "Feel free to share if you know where this is going." "I'm merely an observer," Solomon demurred. "The challenge must be solved by you and your sister alone." I watched Theo continue his fruitless examination of the clock, debating with myself. On one hand, Grandma's letter had instructed me to let Theo reveal himself. On the other, if we were supposed to be solving this together. "The sundial," I said finally. "In the east garden. That's where time stands still yet moves forward." Theo's head snapped up. "How do you know?" I shrugged. "It makes sense. Grandma valued the outdoors far more than anything in the house." He narrowed his eyes but couldn't argue with the logic. "Fine. Let's check." We walked to the sundial, Solomon trailing behind us at a respectful distance. When we reached it, Theo immediately began examining the face, while I pretended to search the base for the first time. "There's an inscription here," I announced after a suitable pause. "Time reveals all truths. 11-9-21-33. Theo crouched beside me. "Numbers. A code? Or a combination," I suggested. He straightened, thinking. The safe in her study. It has a combination lock. We returned to the house, Theo practically racing ahead in his eagerness. When we reached the study, he went straight to the disguised safe I'd already opened. I knew about this, he claimed as he turned the dial. She showed me years ago. I doubted that very much, but said nothing. 11-9-21-33, the safe clicked open. Theo's triumphant expression faltered when he saw the empty interior. There's nothing here. Perhaps someone has already retrieved the contents, Solomon observed. Theo rounded on me. Did you know about this? Have you been in here before? The safe? I asked innocently. Yes, Grandma showed it to me once. I didn't mention that I'd opened it just 2 nights ago. Theo's face darkened. And did you take something from it? Before I could answer, Solomon intervened. According to Mrs. Shaw's instructions, the challenge proceeds regardless of any preliminary investigations. The goal is to follow the complete trail of clues to its conclusion. Then where's the next clue? Theo demanded. I examined the safe more carefully, noting a small indentation in the back panel that I hadn't seen before. There's something here. I pressed the spot, and a hidden compartment opened at the bottom of the safe, revealing another envelope. This one had both our names written on it. Theo snatched it before I could reach it. I'll read it. He tore open the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Knowledge grows like my beloved plants, layer upon layer, season after season. Seek the place where wisdom accumulates, bound in leather and patience. He looked up, brow furrowed. What does that mean? The library, I said immediately. Grandma's collection of botanical books. Theo was already heading for the door. Let's go. The library was on the 2nd floor, a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with volumes ranging from ancient botanical texts to modern gardening manuals. Grandma had spent a lifetime collecting them, often referring to the library as her second garden. Bound in leather and patience, Theo muttered, scanning the shelves. That could be any of these. I moved more deliberately, remembering Grandma's comment about knowledge growing layer upon layer. That suggested something cumulative, built over time. Her journals, I realized aloud. The complete collection. Against the far wall stood a special bookcase containing decades of Grandma's gardening journals, each year bound in leather with the date embossed on the spine. She'd started keeping them as a young woman and had never stopped, creating a comprehensive record of her botanical experiments and observations. Theo followed my gaze. All these? He gestured at the dozens of volumes. We can't go through each one. We don't need to, I said, approaching the collection. We're looking for something specific. I studied the arrangement, thinking about Grandma's methodical nature. The journals were ordered chronologically, starting from her earliest gardening days and proceeding to the present. Layer upon layer, season after season. The beginning, I murmured, remembering her note. When in doubt, return to the beginning. I pulled out the very first journal, dated 1950. Inside the front cover was a pressed flower, a black dahlia, perfectly preserved, and another note. The circle closes where it begins. Return to the first bloom. Theo read over my shoulder, his patience visibly wearing thin. This is ridiculous. More cryptic nonsense. It's not nonsense, I said firmly. It's a reference to her first garden bed, the black dahlias. The same flowers Theo had crushed underfoot just days ago. Fine, he sighed. Let's check the dahlia bed. The black dahlias grew in a secluded corner of the property, a shaded spot that most visitors missed entirely. As we approached, I felt a sense of reverence. These plants had special significance to Grandma, though she'd never fully explained why. "There's nothing here," Theo complained after a cursory glance around. "Just more flowers." "Look more carefully," Solomon suggested from where he stood at a discreet distance. I knelt beside the dahlias, examining each plant meticulously. Then I noticed something odd. One of the plants had what appeared to be a small metal tag attached to its base, similar to the marker I'd found on the witness rose. I brushed aside the soil to reveal it fully. It wasn't a plant marker but a small key, attached to a metal plate engraved with yet another riddle. "What gets wetter as it dries?" "A towel," I said immediately, recognizing the classic riddle. Theo snorted. "Great. So we check every bathroom in the house?" I shook my head. "No. We check the linen closet." The key fit perfectly into the lock of the antique linen closet on the second floor, a massive oak cabinet that had been in the house since before Grandma's time. Inside, among stacks of perfectly pressed sheets and towels, was a wooden box. Theo reached for it, but I was faster. "We open it together." He scowled but didn't argue. The box wasn't locked, and inside we found what appeared to be legal documents, several pages bound with a ribbon, and a sealed envelope with "to be opened last" written on it. I set aside the envelope and unrolled the documents. "It's another will," I said after scanning the first page. "Dated 2 weeks before she died." Theo grabbed it from me, his eyes darting across the text. As he read, his expression shifted from anticipation to confusion to cold fury. "This is a joke," he snapped, thrusting the papers back at me. "It can't be legal." I read more carefully. According to this will, yet another version, the entire estate was to be divided equally between Theo and me, with one significant condition: the property itself, including the house and gardens, could not be sold for at least 10 years after Grandma's death. Instead, it was to be maintained as a public botanical garden and educational center, funded by a trust drawn from her investment portfolio. "She can't control the property from beyond the grave," Theo fumed. "This is ridiculous." "Actually, she can," Solomon interjected, joining us by the linen closet. "It's called a testamentary trust, and it's perfectly legal." "But the will I found was clearly a forgery," Solomon finished for him. "As we both know." Theo's face flushed. "You can't prove that." "Actually," I said quietly, "she can." I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope I'd found in the study safe, the one containing the will Grandma had left for me. I handed it to Solomon, who examined it briefly before nodding. "This appears to be identical to the document we've just found in the linen closet. A duplicate, left to ensure that the truth would come to light regardless of Mr. Shaw's creative efforts." Theo looked from Solomon to me and back again, a trapped expression on his face. "This is a conspiracy. You two planned this together." "We did nothing of the sort," Solomon replied calmly. "However, your grandmother did anticipate your actions with remarkable accuracy. Which brings us to the final piece of this puzzle." He gestured to the sealed envelope we'd found with the will. I broke the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper, on which was written a message in Grandma's unmistakable handwriting. "My darling grandchildren. If you're reading this together, then my plan has worked as intended. This challenge was never about determining who would inherit my estate, that decision was made long ago. Rather, it was about revealing the truth of your characters, to yourselves and to each other. Theodore, your ambition has always outstripped your integrity. From the time you were small, you've been willing to bend rules and manipulate situations to your advantage. I've watched you forge documents before, receipts, school permission slips, even my signature on checks. Did you really think I wouldn't anticipate your attempt to forge my will? The document you created is now in Solomon's possession, along with evidence of your previous forgeries. Should you choose to contest my actual will, this evidence will be presented to the court, and potentially to the district attorney. Vivian, your patience and respect for living things has always been your greatest strength. The garden thrives under your care because you understand that growth cannot be forced or falsified, it must be nurtured honestly and consistently. This is why I've entrusted you with the oversight of the trust that will maintain the gardens. My estate is to be divided equally between you, with the conditions outlined in my will. The property will become a public garden, preserving my life's work while providing education and beauty to the community. After 10 years, you may jointly decide its fate, but only if you both agree. Remember that the most valuable inheritance is not measured in acres or dollars, but in the wisdom we choose to embrace and the legacy we create. With eternal love. Grandma Irene. Silence fell when I finished reading. Theo stood rigid, his face a mask of barely contained rage. Solomon watched him carefully, as if anticipating an explosion. I need to speak with my attorney, Theo said finally, his voice tight. Of course, Solomon replied. Though I should warn you, contesting the will at this point would not be advisable, given the supplementary evidence Mrs. Shaw collected. Theo shot him a venomous look but said nothing further. He strode from the room without another word, leaving Solomon and me standing beside the open linen closet. She planned all of this, I said wonderingly. From the beginning. Solomon nodded, a hint of admiration in his eyes. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. She understood people as well as she understood her plants, their patterns, their weaknesses, their potential for growth. And she knew Theo would try to forge a will. She more than knew it, she counted on it. The entire challenge was designed not to determine the inheritance, but to force him to reveal his deception publicly. I thought about that for a moment. She could have just exposed him from the beginning. Why the elaborate game? Solomon's smile was sad. Because she hoped, perhaps, that the process might teach him something. That seeing his own actions laid bare might inspire change. I wasn't sure I believed that was possible. Theo had spent a lifetime taking shortcuts, bending rules, prioritizing results over methods. One posthumous lesson, however clever, seemed unlikely to transform him. But then again, Grandma had always taken the long view. In her garden, she'd cultivate plants for years, sometimes decades, before they reached their full potential. Perhaps she saw something in Theo that was still capable of growth, given time. What happens now? I asked. Legally? The will stands. The property becomes a botanical garden, maintained by the trust, with you as overseer. Mr. Shaw receives his equal share of the monetary assets. In 10 years, you both decide whether to continue the arrangement or sell the property, assuming you can agree. 10 years seemed like an eternity. Then again, in gardening terms, it was hardly any time at all. How many gardens had I seen Grandma transform in that span? How many plants had gone from seedlings to maturity under her patient hands? I think she knew exactly what she was doing, I said finally, looking down at the papers in my hands. This wasn't just about exposing Theo or protecting the garden. It was her final lesson to both of us. Solomon nodded, a gentle understanding in his eyes. Your grandmother believed deeply in second chances. In redemption. Even for those who might seem beyond it. The days that followed passed in a strange hush. Theo didn't contest the will, though whether from fear of legal consequences or some deeper recognition of his defeat, I couldn't say. He kept his distance, communicating only through his attorney about the logistics of receiving his inheritance. 1 week after our discovery in the linen closet, I was in the greenhouse when I heard footsteps on the gravel path. I looked up to see Theo standing in the doorway, his expensive suit incongruous among the lush foliage. "I'm leaving town," he said without preamble. "Taking a position in Seattle." I nodded, unsure what response he expected. "You won," he continued, a bitter edge to his voice. "You got what you wanted." "I didn't want to win, Theo. I just wanted to honor her wishes." He shook his head, as if the distinction was meaningless. 10 years is a long time to keep this place running. It'll fall apart without proper management. "I don't think so," I said, turning back to the orchids. "Some things thrive with patience rather than ambition." He lingered for a moment longer, perhaps waiting for something more, forgiveness, perhaps, or an admission that I understood his actions. But I remained silent, focused on the delicate blooms before me. Finally, he turned to leave. At the doorway, he paused. "She always liked you better, you know. Even when we were kids." Without waiting for my response, he was gone, gravel crunching under his retreating steps. I stood among Grandma's beloved plants, thinking about growth and time and the lessons that take root when we least expect them. Perhaps, in 10 years, Theo would return a different man. Perhaps not. Either way, the garden would be waiting, as patient and resilient as the woman who had created it.